Warning, censorship. Warning, censorship.
Happy New Year to everybody, except for the politicians of San Francisco, because there, the stay-at-home order is now indefinite.
Where are you from? I'm from Bandon, Oregon, and I just want to let you guys know that I was on the backside, the south side of the steps of the Capitol. Was there about 20 minutes ago. We were standing with my father and my friend on the backside on the stairs. All of a sudden, it seemed like the doors had opened for the Capitol. We didn't bust through them, but they did open. Maybe it was from the inside that they opened.
What are you doing? And you pull so hard, you don't know what hit you.
Check your fucking privilege and get back over there.
Whoa! Yo!
Eric Butler is an independent reporter who covers the urban decay of some of America's biggest cities, including NYC and San Francisco, where he's lived. You can watch him on the podcast Unauthorized Opinions with yours truly, on Instagram at Report and Opine, and also his newly released book is out, New York City 2020, Gotham Unglued, available on Amazon and Barnes & Noble. Eric, how are you doing today? Thanks for joining me.
Absolutely amazing. Thank you for having me.
No problem. Now, you chronicle the abhorrent state of places of NYC and San Francisco where you've lived over the last couple of years. Now, what exactly prompted you to start doing this? Was it failed government policy? Was it culture? What made you want to start recording and taking pictures of all this stuff?
Well, really, it was just being in New York and not being able to go to work, right? I mean, they told us that the virus was outside your front door and that going to the office, participating in the New York City economy was just deadly. So when they told me not to leave home, I naturally had to figure out what was really going on. And I really just started. I never set out to make a book, right? I just set out to explore some parts of New York that I had never seen, take the train to stops that I had never been to. And it wasn't until much later, when I had accumulated thousands of photos, that I decided I might want to make it into a little bit more permanent project.
I want to show some of the crime, which is exactly what I think you're talking about, and it's gotten worse over the last year. You've mentioned stuff like subway stabbings. Here's one man stabbed, robbed in Queens subway station. From what I've read, the attacks in subways, attempted murder of people being pushed on the tracks has gone up exponentially. There's also been armed robberies. I think we have a news article clipping for that as well. Yeah, stealing candy and socks from Times Square's M&M store. Is this a result of defunding the police, Eric? Is it another policy, or is it culture? What are the answers here to the problems that we're seeing? What's the cause?
That's a really tough question, because I think we all know that New York has always been a little gritty, right? It's never, I think, we think about like some of the old movies and, gangs in New York, and it's never been like the perfect picket fence type of place. But I think that when you had the summer of love, right? Last year, 2020, I think a lot of people, and this is just my opinion, of course, is that a lot of people started to realize that they could literally get away with anything. There was no consequences, because when you see that, if you protest and you burn down everything and literally nothing happens to you, then why not keep going? And these stories that you bring up are just the most recent. They're just the most notable. The whole reason, the straw that broke the camel's back for me when I got up and left New York was I was just going to work one morning when there was a drive-by shooting outside my place at 8 a.m. So and that never got any coverage. You didn't see that on NBC or CBS. That was in the hood out in Flatbush, Brooklyn. That wasn't in Times Square, so it gets no coverage. But I think to answer the question, I do not know. I think there's a kind of a bunch of things that go into this, right? So from people being locked up, locked down, I should say. On top of that, they actually have let prisoners out, right? So they could contain the virus inside the prison, but let dangerous people onto the streets, along with the notion that there are no consequences. So there's a number of things that go into this. And it's scary, because just when you think it hits rock bottom, when I think it could get no worse, it somehow does, which is crazy.
Defund the police, let the prisoners out. Solid strategy. Now, last year in New York, from what I've been reading, is that you were at a protest at City Hall. I know there's videos with a lot of the stuff that happened. You were with a group that was, I don't know if you were with them or just in the same place, daring to hold copies of the Constitution and, of course, U.S. flags, all very dangerous things. And you guys were, there's a picture of a guy holding the flag, I think, from the protest there. And you guys got detained at a police station. And then 2 weeks later, some George Floyd protesters occupied the exact same park and didn't receive the same treatment. Am I reading that correctly?
Well, it was a little bit more than 2 weeks. It was probably closer to 6 weeks. But
Oh,
I
okay.
mean, you know, at that point, you're kind of splitting hairs, right? Because I think there was no more than 30 of us. We're talking about 24 people, a lot of them, you know, older in age. You know, there was women there that were probably old enough to be my mom. You know, this was not a violent mob of protesters with Molotov cocktails and spray paint. These were people that just wanted to go back to work, and they blasted us with propaganda. So the cops that were there, I mean, there were probably more cops than there were protesters or rally goers or whatever you want to call it. But they were blasting us with propaganda from a boombox. They didn't even talk to us, really. They just, you know, this gathering is unlawful. It was on a recording, like very, you know, dystopian.
Mm-hmm.
And so they gathered us up. And just for the record, I actually obeyed what they told me to do. I actually have footage of me leaving the park as they're telling us to leave the park. I have video of the cop actually locking the gate to the park. So I was doing what I was being told to do, and I'm just walking backwards, recording them. And one of the guys, so I'm walking down. I'm not in the park anymore, and one of the guys came from. It's hard to explain, but I was under the impression that I was doing exactly what they were telling me to do. But apparently, I didn't do it fast enough. He wanted me to cross the street, and I didn't cross the street because at that time, I'm not even joking, I thought if I just scurried across the street, then I would get like a jaywalking ticket or something. It was kind of a catch-22. But that was May 9th of 2020. And then George Floyd happened, a year ago today, May 25th. And then it was less than a week after that, the protest started in that very same park. And we're talking about hundreds of people, not 24, elderly folks and a couple of college kids. We're talking about hundreds of people from, 20 years old all the way up to probably 50 or 60. And they camped out there in that very same park for 3 weeks and got what they were demanding from the mayor.
That's a very similar topic to what's happened here in Toronto. Protesters, which were actually, they were called Afro-Indigenous Rising. David Menzies loves them. Give us back native land. You're on stolen land protest. That lasted 3 weeks at City Hall in Toronto. And they all they had to do was leave and go to another park, which apparently is allowed as long as you're not right on the City Hall doorsteps. But very similar situations where you can't be punished for one set of politics and another set of politics questioning the authority is definitely an arrestable offense, I guess. So you were you charged, or was the group, there was a promise to appear, or what happened when you guys were brought to the police station?
Yeah, so another just weird thing is while I was actually in the plastic riot cuffs, after we got out of a van, so 9 people in a van built for 10, so no social distancing. When we got out of the van into the police station, I'm still cuffed, and the guy puts a mask on my face for me. So just think about that. I just rode 20 minutes in a van with no social distancing and no mask. So it's all just very theatrical, right? And yeah, they gave us at least, I'm pretty sure all 9 of us got these notice to appears. I'm 99.9% sure that all of those cases were dropped. And you got to keep in mind, though, when that happened, it was already absurd. But to have the double standard, the hypocrisy of the Floyd protest happen a month later just makes it, it's absolutely astonishing. And it just goes to tell, not to be hyperbolic, but New York will take political prisoners. If you do not toe the far left-wing line, then they will put you in jail. It's insane.
Time to paint BLM on your car, Rick, I think is what you're saying.
Yeah, you could do that.
There's something else I want to bring up with you, and it's a big movement that's happening finally, trying to get critical race theory out of school because of the effects it has on children. I want to play a clip from a school board meeting, and I want to get your opinion on what's going on here with parents standing up to their school boards.
Parents giving Forsyth County School Board members an earful.
If you have materials that you're providing where it says if you were born a white male, you were born an oppressor, you are abusing our children.
One speaker after another accused board members of introducing so-called critical race theory about whites, blacks, and U.S. history into the classrooms. Parents saying that CRT is now indoctrinating students, disguised in the school system's initiatives on diversity, equity, and inclusion, or DEI.
The DEI program is a Trojan horse that will bring in a slippery slope. A slippery slope that will ultimately end in critical race theory, white repentance, and the McDonaldization of America's students.
Please get back to just teaching our children math, science, factual history, equity of opportunity, and teach them how to think and not what to think.
McDonaldization, you don't hear that one too often, Eric. Now, in all seriousness, to play both sides here, is this an overreaction from parents, or do you think, or is this necessary?
I think it's necessary. Now, I don't have kids, so it's not a huge issue for me. But I will say that as far as I know, growing up in California and hearing stories out in New York as an adult, is that this is kind of the logical next step in an already corroded public school system, right? Now, I can also testify to that because my mother was a teacher in California and she wouldn't send me to a public school. Now, she worked, she was a special education teacher and she kind of knew a little bit more about the public school system. But from her knowledge of the system, she decided to send me to private school. And that was, a long time ago. So it makes sense that this already awful system is only getting worse. And another thing about this critical race theory, I'm definitely not an expert on it. I think everything has just been wedged into racism, right? I mean, right? Like I posted some things on my Instagram story a couple days ago where I was just Googling, I'm not joking, kind of like how, to harken back to the Chicago challenge that we did, where I just would Google, are microwaves racist? Are televisions racist? I was just putting, and you could find a story like about how eating healthy was racist. So everything is racist, and this critical race theory, to me, as far as I understand it, is just a form of mental gymnastics so that nobody has to take responsibility, right? Well, except for the white people who are, obviously the oppressors and the mean-spirited, cause of all of our problems. They're the only people. So right? You have people out there that are saying white supremacy is the cause of the attacks on Asians that we all know are mostly happening by black people. And think about this. If we saw a white person attack an Asian person, that would get wall-to-wall coverage for the next month. But since it keeps on being black people, they kind of cover it. They throw a little blurb up there, oh, another attack, but they don't really, think about those girls out in DC that killed that guy when they were trying to, hijack his car. But according to, again, I'm not an expert on critical race theory, but as I understand it, you can use those sort of logic, that mental gymnastics to make sure that those girls are still not responsible for their actions. And I think that's what they're trying to do in schools.
And I wanted to ask you as well, why do you think that this is not only being championed by, let's say, people who believe strongly in a Black Lives Matter organization or people who are black and feel they've legitimately been oppressed, for lack of a better word? Why is it also being championed by white people who end up being the victims or the perpetrators of this? In critical race theory, the white person is the person doing the oppressing. You're born as an oppressor, just as we saw in that clip, somebody mentioning that children, probably the ages of 12, I'd have to imagine, and younger in a lot of these cases, that was in Georgia specifically, that they're being taught that as soon as they get out of the womb, they've done some sort of racial crime just by existing. Why do you think there are so many people who are willing to villainize themselves like that?
I don't know, man. I guess it's just a sense of guilt and what I think maybe is more commonly known as like the white savior complex. Like, so they really think that, I mean, right? It's such a roundabout way of still kind of being, for lack of a better term, a white supremacist, right? I mean, that line of thinking implies that they are better. I mean, think about the voting thing, right? Like, oh, well, black people can't get an ID. Black people don't have cars, Joe Biden said. They didn't know how to use the internet, right? Like, I mean, Joe Biden, maybe I'm getting a little bit off the topic here, but I think that's the line of thinking, is that like, well, these people, they just need help. They can't do anything without us, which is very strange because I don't remember hearing that when Barack Obama was president, right? But their brains have all melted out of their ears since Donald Trump was president, and they just don't know what to do. So, I mean, think about how to shift a little bit from critical race theory to the term like structural racism or institutional racism. I mean, if you, right, like it goes without saying that people like Joe Biden, who are getting close to 90 years old or whatever it is, that have been implementing these laws for decades, is that structure, right? I mean, everybody on the left, the entire media, conglomerate, mafia, big tech, all of those people, that is the establishment. So if those people, right, kind of like to your point, it's like you're pointing the finger at yourself almost, right? Like all the white people championing critical race theory are not only the oppressors, but they're also, I mean, it's just, again, I'm not like, it's so confusing.
I think what you're trying to say is we're so oppressed that we believe in the oppressors, and everybody who was against the government before is now saying, no, the government is the one who we need to enforce this, even though they're oppressing us, but please help us, Joe Biden. I think it has to do with not having anybody to blame now that Trump is no longer in office. And if a lot of these places actually condemned those who were immediately in their city council or immediately as their mayors, they wouldn't like the answers, because in a lot of these cities like Baltimore and Chicago and Detroit, it is black leadership. But I digress on that topic. I want to push over to the other side of the country we are also from, in California. There's a big push to get Gavin Newsom out now, finally. But his main competitor is none other than your favorite Caitlyn Jenner. There's a lot of controversy here. Is it good or bad? How do you see this panning out?
I do not see this working because A, Caitlyn Jenner is just not really. Now, of course, California hates conservatives, but from where I'm standing, Caitlyn, Bruce, he, she, whatever you want to go with, is not truly a conservative. Not just because of the transgender thing, but I think if you look at some of her comments about immigration and race and police reform and the election, those are all moderate, if not a little bit left positions. Now, unfortunately for Caitlyn, that's not going to work because she's already come out as having voted for President Trump, even though now she says that, well, the election was fine, nothing was wrong there, which, there's still a lot to be debated. But the point is, that person is not left enough for the left. They already do not like her, right?
If you're living in California still, Eric, are you voting Caitlyn Jenner or Gavin Newsom or abstaining?
Abstaining. No, I mean, I think there's some other people. I think there's a guy, Cox or Major Williams. There's a couple of other people who are on the ballot who probably don't stand a chance, but at least you got to try, because the point I'm making is Caitlyn is too far left for an actual conservative and doesn't toe the line of every single weirdo left-wing policy for the left. So she's in the middle trying to please everybody, and nobody's going to like it. It's not going to work. That's what I think. I mean,
now Caitlyn Jenner is under some criticism from, the establishment that doesn't want to, the same establishment that wants to criticize anyone who questions anything a transgender person says is now criticizing Caitlyn Jenner because of a Republican R in front of his name, in front of her name. I think this clip of Jimmy Kimmel shows that the veil might be lifting. Let's play that, and I want to get your reaction.
What I liked about Donald Trump is he was a disruptor. You know, he came in and shook the system up.
After Caitlyn Jenner's Fox News town hall, Jimmy Kimmel is blasting the former Olympian and reality TV star for comments she made about her airplane hangar and California's homeless population that many called out of touch. Jenner, who is among those running to replace California Governor Gavin Newsom, who will face a likely recall election in November, granted her first interview to Fox News host Sean Hannity from her airplane hangar. On Thursday's Jimmy Kimmel Live on ABC, the host noted Jenner oddly mentioned her plane a number of times before talking about others who own an airplane hangar.
This is how well Caitlyn Jenner understands the plight of everyday Californians here in LA.
Kimmel then showed a clip from her Fox News interview where Jenner opened up about how her friends are, quote, leaving California.
Actually, we're at my hangar. The guy across right over from me, he was packing up his hangar. I said, where are you going? And he says, I'm moving to Sedona, Arizona. I can't take it here anymore. I can't walk down the streets and see the homeless.
Here was Kimmel's response.
Homeless people can't walk around them, can't fly over them, you know?
The late night host went on to say this.
Is it transphobic to call a trans person an ignorant a-hole? I mean, or does calling that trans person an ignorant a-hole, even though she happens to be a trans person, show that we don't discriminate against ignorant a-holes?
Eric, it reminds me of the late great comedian Patrice O'Neill, who'd always point out how uncomfortable an audience gets when he makes a joke, and I feel like that's happening to Jimmy Kimmel's audience there. He's talking about like a form of elitism against Caitlyn Jenner, yet I promise you he's got more money than her. He hangs out with Howard Stern and everybody out in Connecticut all the time. He hosts all the huge Hollywood parties with the celebrities. So for him to mock somebody for talking about their hangar, which was obviously done so that they can avoid any guidelines or any laws about social distancing to have the interview and everything, for him to say that is kind of just pretending like he's one of the people. He's still the host of the Man Show. That's sort of just like a beside. But at the same time, I feel like this is the same person who would be calling people transphobe if they question the director of education. Am I wrong there? Do you think the veil is starting to lift about what we can criticize regarding a transgender person? Is it just because Caitlyn Jenner is coming out as a Republican?
I think a little bit of both, right? And let's make no mistake. Kimmel is no more than an empty Hollywood puppet. He is gonna speak the lines, right? He is not gonna have any of his own thoughts. He is not gonna have any of his own opinions. He is an establishment puppet to the fullest, right? I mean, and nobody wants to talk about when he did blackface or when his ex-wife or ex-girlfriend also did blackface, and he was, you know, famous for the show with the girls jumping on trampolines and all that stuff, right? But now that he toes the line so perfectly, it's all gone out the window. And this is just like the other topics that we talked about. I mean, with the critical race theory, it's the mental gymnastics have gone full circle to the point where they are literally or not literally, but like figuratively eating their own tail, right? Like it's a rich guy, a rich Hollywood elite making fun of another rich Hollywood elite for being a rich Hollywood elite. Just like the white people that are pro critical race theory making fun of or looking down upon other white people who are not for. I mean, it is an absolute mess of these people who have twisted themselves up into a pretzel at the woke altar. It just doesn't make any sense. So, but to answer your question, I think think about it. If Caitlyn were to run against Newsom as a Democrat, it would be a completely different story. You wouldn't be able to talk about the time when she smashed somebody with her car. You know what I mean? But now that she has an R in front of her name, like you said, it's all fair game. And I don't know where this ends, man. I really don't. And the Bay Area, California as a whole, is just not looking good right now. It's very sad.
Last question on that subject. Is it better for the Republicans to sort of pitch this big tent theory and try to get everyone under them, or to stick to their beliefs? Because the big argument I'm seeing with Republicans, a lot of people don't identify as Republicans anymore. I shouldn't say that. A lot of conservatives, like, I don't know if you're familiar with a young guy named Vince Dow. He's having a lot of debates with people based on the fact that they believe Caitlyn Jenner, albeit having good policies or not, they don't think that Hispanic immigrants or residents in California, permanent residents, immigrants, citizens in California of Hispanic origins, they don't think that they would vote for a person who's transgender. So is it better for them to go with this big tent theory and try to prevent people from branching off, or should they stick to their guns of what are supposed to be Republican viewpoints or opinions?
I mean, I would say stick to your guns, right? Now, unfortunately, they've already given far too much leeway. I mean, what's the old saying that Republicans are just Democrats from 10 years earlier? You know, where they just keep sliding further and further left. I mean, I was doing some research about the passing of medical cannabis in California. And it sounds eerily similar to like what we're seeing now with this critical race theory and this weird gender ideology, where it took them years, you know, over a decade, chipping away at them trying to legalize weed. George Soros was actually a part of that. I mean, you know, he's famous for these hard left-wing movements, but it just rings very similar. So unfortunately, I think at this point, they may have to go with a Big Ten thing, but it's really tough to say. And I only would say that simply because they've already given up too much ground. If they had stood their ground a decade ago, then maybe you could still stand your ground. But now it's like, can we just not be communists? That's the only thing that's pretty much the only thing.
A fair request, I think, to make. That's going to do it for our YouTube and Rumble segment, Eric, because we want to get behind the protection of the paywall when we talk about forbidden subjects like the New York City vaccine segregation that's happening at arenas. So everybody go to rebelnewsplus.com, sign up for just $8 a month, or if you sign up yearly, you'll get 2 free months plus a free month's trial. That's rebelnewsplus.com to talk about how crazy New York is, everybody. Hey guys, thanks for watching another episode of Andrew Says. Be sure to go to rebelnewsplus.com and subscribe for the full episode. But here on Rumble, it's not going to be censored, and there's way more stuff we can talk about that we could never say on YouTube.